Es nemenedžēju procesu, jā. Pārējais es vietā pārdarīju, šo es izvēju no rokām. Labi. Mēs darīsim tā kā Amerikas kongresmens mūsu jā. So I'm getting a message from our outside viewers, from the webcast viewers, that they can see us and even hear us. So I think it's time for us to start. It's my great pleasure to welcome everybody to this seminar, Masterclass of Excellence, which is organized together with University of Latvia and the representation of the European Commission in Latvia. Before we start with our program, I'd like to say just a couple of words. How did we end up being here all together? So for me personally, a path to this event has started far away in China, in a World Economic Forum event where some of young scientists were greeted and celebrated. And there I met people who told me that there is a pan-European framework, a network of outstanding young scientists being set up, and they told me that Latvia should be part of that network. The network I'm talking about is called Sci Generation. It's run by COST, which is the European Organization for Cooperation in Science and Technology. And this week we have a Fourth Management Committee meeting of this network here in Riga on Thursday and Friday. The chairman of the network, Professor Thomas Schäfer, is one of the mentors of the Masterclass, so he will also say a few words about that effort. But today, the main point is to hear the actual stories of real scientists, their personal perspective on their road to success, and to see what common themes we can identify in that. So in general, today's program has two parts. The first part is stories of individual mentors. The second part is a panel discussion to listen to questions and to wrap up our conclusions. But before we start with the, I'd say, scientific program, I am very pleased to give the stage to our hosts and representatives. And first, I'd like Mrs. Ina Steinbuka, the head of the representation of the European Commission in Latvia, to say a few words. Please, Ina.
Distinguished guests, dear participants, Rector Auziņš, it's really my great pleasure to welcome all of you in the House of Europe. It seems to me that science is the only hope of the science of innovation, both. The only hope for European growth, job creation, and so on, because only science and innovation can really boost productivity, competitiveness of the Europe. Unfortunately, Europe is lagging behind the US and China and Korea in terms of research and innovation. And what is very important to have sort of inspiration, especially for young researchers. Today, I address not only this audience, which consists, I would say, not only from the young, but rather from the matured scientists, but I'm addressing also our online viewers and listeners, because it seems to me that this is our major audience for today. When I'm opening this sort of science, the Forum of Science, I always recall my own story. I myself, I have research background. I used to be professor of macroeconomics at the Latvian University. Then somehow I switched mostly to the European structure, but in my soul, I always will remain the researcher. And in my youth, as a young researcher, I also belonged to the different very prominent and very inspiring international frameworks. Okay, during Soviet times it was a bit more difficult, but after Latvian independence, I really belonged to the very distinguished networks of scientists participated in the number of research projects, and that's why. And I can tell you my own story, but today, you know, I will give the stage to you. But what is very important indeed to share your own experience, to give motivation and inspiration and encouraging of those who perhaps has some doubt about necessity to belong to the research community. You know, the salary are not that high and so on and so forth. So there are some doubts. I really would like that today's masterclass and your network costs would have a very important impact on the development of European science and research and Latvian science and research. I wish you a very, very productive day. And thank you very much for coming, for accepting the invitation. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And also invite to say a few words the Rector of the University of Latvia, Professor Marks.
Hello, this is Steinboka, dear colleagues, dear friends. I'm really happy to be co-host of this, I would say, very remarkable event, together with European Commission representation in Latvia. And I think that there's two goals of this masterclass. One definitely is to demonstrate, especially to those young people who are viewing us today on the webcast, that chance to obtain this very high prestige and highly valued European grants is not only for mature researchers with birds which are already turning white, but for young people it's still possible. That you must only try hard, and I don't know from which attempt all of you got your grants, probably not from the first one, but it means that you must be persistent, you must try again and again, but finally, if you are really doing good research, you will succeed and you will have this chance to obtain funding from European agencies and to develop your own research. For relatively young researchers, I would wish you success with your research. Probably when you started your research with your mentors, older professors, at some point starting to think about independent research. At that point, I guess you feel like new branches from this old tree, which has traditions and which has developed for many years. Now you are starting to develop your own tree, and probably in some years there will be some genealogical tree of your research children from your PhD students. I know that some of my very senior professors in the United States usually trying to draw this genealogical tree. It started from professors and says first generation PhD students, next generation PhD students. In some sense, you are in this beginning point, and I wish to have very large genealogical tree of your research with many branches and with very many of your students and students of your students. So I'm looking forward for your presentations, for your talks. I think that not only younger generation can learn from you, but for us who already are in research for some time, still I think that we can get new ideas from your presentation. And finally, maybe not very traditionally, I wish many long coffee breaks for this conference. And I can explain why I'm meaning that. Because maybe not so many young researchers are today in audience, but some still are there. And I would be very happy if you will have time for informal communication, because sometimes this formal story is important, but some nuances which sometimes you are not putting in your presentation, maybe these are not kind of even politically correct sometimes. But very important experience if you are wishing to get success. And you need this time for informal communication. Sometimes even from this informal communication, some new ideas are appearing, maybe new collaborations are starting. And if something will be happening during this conference, as a rector of the university, I will be more than happy. So all the success to your workshop.
Thank you very much. And finally, we have also another special European dimension to this event. As you may see in the poster behind the panel, 2015, the first half is the time when Latvia holds the rotating presidency of the European Council. And the Minister of Education and Science of Latvia, Ms. Marita Seila, has prepared a message for today's Masterclass participants. Unfortunately, Mrs. Seila cannot deliver that in person. She is out of the country, but I kindly ask the Chief of Staff to the Minister for Science and Education of Latvia, Mrs. Linda Auster, to deliver the message. Please, Linda.
Thank you very much, Madam Steinbucka, Rector Auziņš. Just for the note, for the media present, the Minister is not yet out of the country. She's in the Parliament at the moment, so that we all know the truth. Thank you very much again for having us here today, and indeed the message from Minister. Competitive Europe is one of the priorities of the Latvian presidency of the Council of the European Union. Research excellence is the foundation of competitiveness for the present and the future generations, as recognized by the Horizon 2020 program for research and innovation, which includes excellent science as one of the three main pillars. Europe needs her best minds to flourish. We need to create the environment where the best ideas succeed and the young researchers grow to the fullness of their potential. It is my pleasure to welcome you in Riga. The outstanding researchers working at the very forefront of innovation. I hope your success stories, which are webcast live, will inspire many researchers at the very beginning of their careers. I am glad to see the creators of knowledge to be actively engaged in a dialogue with policymakers. The actual doers of science, the emerging leaders of their disciplines, are the ones who know best what it takes to build a successful scientific career. I wish you productive discussions and hope that valuable lessons will be learned today at the Masterclass seminar and during the upcoming days of the meeting of Cost-C Generation Network in Riga. This is the message from the Minister with her warmest welcomes. I'm very glad to extend those for you today. And indeed, we are all from the Minister, from the Ministry, wishing you all the best and looking forward to your results. Published, spread, and implemented. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So now we switched our main program, and the main speakers are all in front of you. I think they themselves will be their own best introductors, but I'm still very pleased and honored to welcome. So first, Professor. So I'll name everybody at the table and then give word to ladies. Ladies first. Professor Liesbet Geris from Belgium, University of Liege and Catholic University of Leuven, here with us. Professor Thomas Schäfer from University of the Basque Country, Spain, also the chairman of Cost-C Generation Network. Professor Alexander Fedora, also from Spain. Izcili Universitat Autónoma de Barcelona. You'll correct my Spanish. Sure. Then we have Søren Frank from University of Southern Denmark, right? And Andres Ambainis from University of Latvia. So without many more kind of empty words, let's our mentor speak, and I give the words to Professor Thomas Schäfer. Please, Thomas.
Thank you very much, Slava. And first of all, thank you very much for this nice... Do I need the microphone? Can you hear me well?
You need the microphone because of the... I remind the speakers, listeners, that they have both the live translation and both the live broadcast and the live translation into Latvian, and that will be part of the archive, and we'd like to keep that heritage. There are two very professional people working for us. So keep a watch that our translators are happy. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. So first of all, thank you very much for this kind invitation to come here. It's a very nice place. I had some time yesterday to see Riga. Thanks a lot to Slava for all the organization. It was really very well done, excellent. And so not to lose too much time, as we talked about political correctness, so I make the first politically incorrect statement. We have two people from Spain. I'm from the Basque country, and we have somebody from Catalonia, so I'm joking. And I'm even German, and he's half German, so I mean, we are a good mix, so this is Europe. I'm from San Sebastian, Donostia in Basque, San Sebastian in the Basque country, which is very close to the French border. Biarritz maybe is better known. And I always take this photo first, because science is also about being in an environment that is pleasant to be, where you want to live and have nice landscapes, food, etc. And San Sebastian, maybe to some of you, is very famous for this. And I'm talking about stimuli-responsive systems. So this is a stimulus for many people that come to the Basque country. This is what you call a pincho. Pincho means a stick. It's a little tapa. And actually, between Catalonia and the Basque country, there are lots of Michelin stars, and Madrid as well. But I think San Sebastian, if it's true, they like to say that they are the second city in the world with most Michelin stars per square meter. So you can already see by the definition, per square meter. If you look per habitant, maybe it doesn't get so favorable or whatever. But anyway, it is really a very good place to eat and drink and to live. So apart from the weather, which is not always so nice, but okay. Now this is the stimulus, and your response was obvious, so you smile. So this is all about stimuli-responsive systems. You bring a stimulus and you hope that something happens that you expect. If you had been crying now, it would not have been the response that I expected. I'm a chemical engineer, and the other statement was made relatively young. Well, this is really relative in my case, because I don't feel that young anymore, but I must say that I started the research that I'm doing actually only 6 years ago. And that was when the first call of the ERC came out. I'm a chemical engineer. I work with membranes. And at that time, I had the chance, and I will go back to this later on when we talk about how to do science and what I think are my ideas that are very important to put into practice for young researchers. And so I changed. And if we talk about membranes, this is, for example, what you find in the supermarket many times. The wrapping is a polymer, which is actually a membrane barrier. You find this also with meat. So these plastics are actually not so trivial. These are plastics that usually try to maintain a nitrogen atmosphere where the fruit is or where the meat is, so to keep oxygen out. So this is a barrier. This is a membrane. So it keeps things out. It lets other things through. And you can use this also for something completely different. That's water filtration, for example. So this is a membrane. This is a cut of a membrane. You see there are pores. And these pores, they let water through, but not bacteria, no virus, no contaminants. So these membranes you use for making clean water. And this is extremely relevant today because I just had a look yesterday. One of the biggest companies in the world, I think they are Belgium-based, if I'm not wrong, Detremont, they produce about 2.8 million cubic meters per day of clean water with such membranes. Barcelona is a city, I don't know whether you know, has 20% of their drinking water is produced with these membranes, 20%. Melbourne is a city where 1/3 of the membranes, 1/3 of the water, of the drinking water, is produced by membranes, by desalination. So they take these membranes, they pass salt water over the membrane, and they filter the fresh water out. So this is a huge market. And then we have membranes in ourselves. Those that we are sitting here, we wouldn't be looking like we look if we didn't have cell membranes, because our cell membranes keep things in place. So we would be probably an amorphous blob sitting here. So membranes are everywhere, but of course they differ a lot, what you want to do and how you apply them. And what we are doing, and I just give a quick overview of what we are doing, because I think this is always important to understand science in the end. We are using the membrane that you see on the left. So these are membranes that have very, very tiny pores, 10 nanometers. So this is really almost as small as you can get with a membrane. But these are still holes, so molecules can still go through. And what we would like to do is to use this support to mimic what the cell membranes do, because the cell membranes are fantastic. If you think about your body, actually, it is amazing that in every second that we talk, there are lots of processes happening across your cell membrane. Ions go in, ions go out, molecules go in and out. You have really a permeation of stuff, water even. So our body is a fantastic machine relying on the transport of molecules across cell membranes. And this is not so easy to do as a chemical engineer, to mimic. So what we are trying to do is to see what you're on the right. So we have a pore, and what you can do, for example, with polymers or something, you can attach them to the edge of the pore. And then you have, in the normal state, you have flux through. But if you, for example, what you attach at the pore, if this responds, here we come to stimulo-responsive. If this, what you have at the edge of the pore, responds to a stimulus like heat, for example, it can extend, it can expand. And in this way, it closes the pore, and what you see is that less goes through. So this is what you can make. You can make things smart by using molecules that are smart, that respond to stimuli. Now, what we are doing is we are using something that is very well known to most of you probably, and this is DNA. So DNA has in principle nothing to do with chemical engineering so far. But it is a molecule that is fantastic, and I don't know how far you are familiar with it. I was not so much many years ago. I just knew the basics. But DNA has the wonderful characteristics that DNA has repetitive motifs. So it is actually a molecule that consists only of 4 different parts that are arranged in different sequences. And what is amazing in this way are 2 things. One is that if you put the sequence in a different way, this DNA will interact in a different way. So you can really tailor your interaction you want to have in the way you put the sequence, but you never change it completely. It's just mixing 4 things. The other thing is that there are complementary strands. As you see, you have a single strand and a complementary strand. So these 4 bases, they determine also the complementary strand, the famous duplex, the helical structure of the DNA that you know. Why is this such a nice building block for an engineer? Because depending on the sequence of this DNA, it can interact with molecules. And what you see here is, you don't have to really understand what is there. It's just a picture that is enough. You see then in orange, this is a DNA, and you have 2 little molecules, which is adenosine monophosphate. Adenosine triphosphate is one of the energy carriers in our body. And you can see how 2 molecules fit into this big DNA molecule. If I changed little parts of this DNA, this would not happen anymore. So you can see that you have a building block here with which you can design, like building a house. So you have in one part, you have windows, doors, whatever. You can do the same with the DNA. And our idea is, since you can do this, to engineer DNAs in a way that when they interact, that they actually do something that for us is very important, and this is that they change their shape. Because since we can engineer DNA, since we know always the sequences, we can do that if something docks to this DNA, that it, for example, elongates. And when it goes away, it shrinks again. So this is a stimulus response. The stimulus is the molecule, here is AMP, and the response is a change in shape, a change in conformation. And there we close the circle, and that is that if we have membranes with holes, like these ones, and we put this DNA into the holes, if we manage, then if we bring the stimulus, these molecules will close the holes, the pores, and if the stimulus is gone, it will open again. So this is a stimulus-responsive system like our cell membranes. Of course, much simpler, much more basic, engineered. But it is something that can do actually a stim-responsive system on the nanoscale and completely on itself. We don't have to do anything. If molecules are there, it will happen, and if not, it will not. Now this, just to show you, this is just a result. This is just showing you that if we increase the concentration of our stimulus in this ATP, we see a responsive pore closing. And you see on the right, you see the green line. So in this case, what we have, we can see how things go through the pore, and you see the blue line. This is when actually nothing is happening and everything is closed. But you can use this also for something else. And this is using these DNA building blocks in not membranes, but in particles. And the underlying idea is that these membranes, as I said, these aptamers, these DNA sequences, as I said, you can make them specific, depending on the sequence, for different molecules. And one of them is nucleolin. So nucleolin is a protein that is expressed by cancer cells. Every cell has nucleolin, but cancer cells actually express it to the surface. So the nucleolin is on the surface, not inside. Now there's DNA. Of course, we borrow a lot of things from medicine. So there's DNA that interacts specifically with nucleolin. Now, if we go a step further and we attach this DNA to particles which are hollow inside, where we could put in drugs, and we put this DNA on top to close the pores, then if this drug-loaded particle comes in touch with nucleolin, we know that it will interact, and this interaction will open the pores, and we have a release of drugs. This is very basic still. So this is absolutely preliminary, and I always say at this point, I don't want to sell anything on the cost of cancer, because it's a very serious thing. But this is basic research where you can see that DNA is a fantastic building block to do things. And you can see that, for example, that if you have a healthy cell, you see on the top row, basically you see nothing. This is what is supposed to happen. And you see on the bottom, you see these green stars. This is fluorescence that only appears when there's interaction between our DNA and cancer cells. So you see that actually our particles interact where they should. And this is a very exciting thing, that you can use a building block for so many different things without ever changing it completely, just as you want. Now, this is about Mars. This is the surface of Mars, and usually this is another stimulus. Usually when I put this, you see empty faces. And I have told you now what we are doing with DNA and about nanopores, and we shouldn't forget on what scale we are talking about. This is a really, really small scale. We cannot just look at it and see what happens. All that we are doing, what I made in a resume now, is something that we do on such a small scale where we try to use other methods to try to deduce what is really happening. But we never have a clear, obvious, direct evidence. Always it is indirect. So that means what we are doing requires a lot of critical attitude. And this is Mars, which I show a lot to my students. And I say, as long as you have not been to Mars, this is what the Mars surface could look like. You have the Mars Global Express running around. You have these buildings, which are pyramids. You can see artichokes growing there, with people obviously in suits, obviously, because this is not Earth. So you have the Exhibition Space Art Center on the right. As long as nobody has been there, this is as valid and as true as anything else. And the same applies to what we are doing. So as soon as you manage to actually bring something there and to see what it is really like, you see that this is just a bloody desert. There are no artichokes, and there's absolutely nothing. So this is something, sometimes what happens also to us. We have to be very careful to not interpret the things in a way that we wish to. And this brings us, in fact, to the second very short part, and that is how to do this science. I mean, this was based on an ERC grant. I'm very reluctant to call my own research frontier science. I mean, people say that ERC grants are this. That's okay. But I think also we need to maintain a certain humbleness and see ourselves just as some player in the whole science field. And when we do this area, when we do this, if we call it frontier research, you might have seen now from what I told you that first of all, many times this is multidisciplinary. Now I have to my left a working group leader too, actually, from Sci Generation, because this is one of the working groups of Sci Generation, which is on multidisciplinary research and also a bit ethics. And so maybe I'm using the wrong term here. Maybe my research is transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary. I'm getting lost in this. But it is, usually you are in touch with other areas, which is great. But of course, it's a danger also, because in fact, to do really research in this cross-section of different areas, also like we are doing, means that you have to be very careful, because there are experts out there that are doing things that you are doing now. They have been doing this for 30 years. So what you need to do is to find, first of all, the right people, to understand the language, because it's different, and to learn a lot. I've never learned so much like the last 5 years, because I was forced to, in order not to fall into any trap, actually. This is one thing. So you need, for this research, if we now go to what do we need for that, you need an environment that gives you feedback. And you need to expose yourself as much as possible. Because as soon as you expose yourself, and if you have good collaborators, they will criticize you, and you will learn, you will grow. So I think the first thing is exposing oneself is extremely important. And in many parts of Europe, students are not trained to expose themselves. I'm talking about my own place. We are quite shy and timid. And this is a problem. The second thing is that frontier research takes time. So this is not something you can do. You can start today and finish in 4 years' time. So this is something that might start and take 10 years' time until you get the first results. We got our first results, really good results, maybe 1.5 years ago, after 5 years. So this is something we need to turn into consideration, because this is an investment which you don't know at the beginning whether it will result in something useful or not. So you need people that are capable of making this judgment. Then excellence. Excellence, what is excellence? Somebody said once that how much excellence can we actually have in the world? Because by the simple definition of the world, to excel means that you excel, that you are different from the majority. Now, how much excellence can we have? If we look at how much the use of excellent, the word excellent, you can already understand that this is a buzzword meanwhile also. And excellence surely is not only high impact factor journals, it's also surely not high H index only. This is another problem. I think we are many countries in Europe, and we are also looking into this, many countries in Europe are running after impact factors and H index, which is surely an indicator, but it's nothing but an indicator. And while other countries, like United Kingdom, for example, already start to worry or to wonder whether it really makes sense to look so much at impact factors, because probably it does not. Also, but not only. The next thing is that we need to create a dynamic research environment. You see already from the work that we are doing, I have benefited a lot from having around people from different areas that I can talk to during a coffee break, the coffee break that you mentioned before. This is very important, because if we are on our own, then it is very hard to keep up. You can read a lot, but sometimes talking 5 minutes or 10 brings things into place very quickly. And then I would say it's not, let me be very careful about what I'm saying here. I don't mean it literally what I will say. I know that it might cause some perturbance. It's not that we should be excellent. I think what is more important is we should strive for excellence. So we should give our best, honestly our best. Because sometimes you cannot be excellent because maybe you do not have the means, you do not have the environment, but that doesn't mean you cannot strive for excellence. You can try to look for other ways. I think this is very important. So finally, about this, somebody said many centuries ago, it was Voltaire, judge a man by his questions rather by the answers. And I think this is extremely important nowadays, because if we look at publications, etc., well, we are publishing really a lot. And this is not necessarily what means excellence. Sometimes it's excellent to just make the right question, which can trigger so much more than a good publication. So the last thing that I would suggest is what we need is to have very good judges, and that's not very easy to have. So thank you very much. Sorry if I was a bit long. I would like to thank my group, just to show the people here. Some of them have gone, some still are there, but without them, this would not be existing. And thank you very much for your attention. I'd like to acknowledge also the BAS Foundation for Science. This is actually one way of attracting researchers. They attract researchers from all over the world as research professors, so you don't have to speak Spanish or Basque. You can just work as researcher. Slava for the organization. And I'm also from the Baltic Sea, actually, and people say where I am from in Germany that the more you go east, the more beautiful the Baltic Sea gets. And I guess they are right, because our place is terrible. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I suggest we do the following. If the audience, which is live here, has some direct questions to Thomas, you're most welcome to ask. But if you have a more general questions, which might be addressed by a number of panelists, that we do that during the panel discussion. So any questions for Thomas? Yeah, okay, there's one. Please, Professor Collins.
You are scholar in Schäfer Institute of Organic Synthesis. My question is towards your, let's say, criteria for excellence. You mentioned that not only these two impact factor or whatever, what would be these criteria you would recommend, Brad?
Yeah, no indicator. So I have a very easy criterion. I think everybody who works in science will probably agree. And that is, if you talk to somebody for, 10 minutes, you understand whether this person is very good in her or in his field or not. So I think, of course, you cannot do this. We have discussed this also inside Generation. So the good thing is then, if you have so many collaborators that are in the same area, not in the same area, in the same situation, but in different areas, different countries, it's amazing to come together and find the same answer in this sense. So this is fantastic about this network. I enjoy this a lot. And we came also to the conclusion that in the end, maybe you have to put the evaluation effort, you have to scale it with the grant, for example. ERC grants mean a lot of money. So it's good to have interviews. And these interviews, I think all of us can say that, are not easy. But they give them a good idea whether it's worth it or not. Now, if you have small grants, maybe you can just go lighter. You don't have to make, because you cannot interview everybody for everything. But I think what we need to have more is the ethics in an area where you have colleagues that actually evaluate you as a scientist. And this is something I know. This is, you cannot pin it down to clear indicators, but this is science. You cannot pin it down to indicators. If you did that, any technician could do it, right? So I think we need to cultivate again more this situation of communication between researchers, and also have the courage to say to somebody that you don't believe in his qualities. It also makes part, I mean, also with your students. You sometimes have to say, well, I'm sorry. It doesn't make you a worse human being, but scientifically, you are not where you have to be, okay? So.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, one short remark, please.
It will be a short remark, but I'm a bit worried about your statement that excellence doesn't mean all this bibliometrical criteria. And I will explain why. Because basically you are right. I could agree with you. But to have this situation, we must have this corporate culture inside the research group. And for young research groups, it's not always there. And then, as a rector, I'm very often meeting situations that people are telling me that age factor, for example, 0 is equally well than age factor 20. Because we are special, we are in special country, special situation, and so on. So probably we should start as a reference point all these impact factors of journals, age factors, and so on. And when we have established this corporate culture, then we have can we go to the direction that yes, this is excellent research. Probably it's very innovative. Maybe there's no already established framework and there's no high-level publications. And then we are supporting that. But we must have this corporate culture at the beginning, and then from that we can go for this very innovative, excellent research, which probably not always refer to the precise bibliometrical criteria.
Yeah. Let me shortly comment, because I made it just quickly, because this is I absolutely agree, and I made a shortcut. We are talking about Europe, and this is really interesting, because I'm in Spain now, in the north, and we have researchers that are well beyond the importance of impact factor and age index, because they are simply excellent. They have age indices of 60, 80. They don't even worry about this, and nobody doubts even their quality. But then we have researchers in Spain that are what you said, that are really not publishing even. They are not doing research. So what is the problem here? The problem is to put the same rules for everybody. And the problem here is that if you start to look too much at age index and impact factor, then it's not the ones that you want to target that get maybe badly influenced. It's the ones that come after, and that's the young researchers. Because the situation now is also in Germany, that people, the students, They want to publish in Nature and Science, which is great, but they think first, how will I make my paper? And then they think about science, if at all. So the problem here is that I completely agree with you, because you need, first of all, to get the first step, and then you go to the second. But I think we are at different trains also in Europe, because some places, they don't have the problem anymore of having a corporate structure, whatever. They have it already. And so they go a step further. So it doesn't make sense to make the same mistakes. I understand we have to establish the research quality, but I also think we have to be already careful to not make the same mistakes as others, as saying, we look at age index and impact factor, and we forget about science. We will not, but the young researchers, they have to learn still what means science. And so I think this is something we have to do in parallel. It's something, there's no clear answer. It depends on the leaders, I think, to transmit the right mix of both. So I completely agree with you. It's very dangerous to put it in one phrase. You know.
Fantastic. We have very serious issues already being discussed, and we hope to continue during our panel discussion. Now to go on, I give the stage to Professor Liesbet Geris, and we'll need a little technical break to switch the computers. Technology works. Liesbet, please.
Thank you, Slava, for the invitation and for the organization. It's really funny, actually, when you give a very simple assignment to 5 scientists, talk for 15 minutes about how you got where you are right now, then you will get 5 completely different answers and different structures, but I guess that's part of what makes it interesting. When I was making this presentation, at some point I started thinking about the song called Everybody's Free to Wear Sunscreen. It's from the late 90s, so I don't know if some of you know it. But it's this guy who talks about, who's giving advice to the future generation. I felt a little bit like that. And one of the phrases in this song is, choices are half chance. And I think that's very important, because what I say here will be a mixture of things that I try to establish myself, added, of course, by a lot of chance that crossed my path. So take it for what it's worth. This is how I try to make my journey. Let's start with the very dry facts, the facts that you can also find in your notes, and I'm just simply going through them because A, it gives me a chance to explain what the research topic is, and B, it is useful for reference for the later parts of my presentation. So, I am a mechanical engineer by training. I had my PhD both at the University of Leuven. I spent some time in Oxford, and then I moved to Liège, which is also in Belgium, where I was also in the mechanical engineering and aerospace engineering department. I'm responsible there for the Master of Biomedical Engineering, and some years later I got a part-time appointment at the University of Leuven, where I'm responsible for the whole tissue engineering network and running the lab, the wet lab there. So my research interests, as you've already guessed, involve the engineering part of tissue engineering, more specifically bone tissue engineering. What we want to do is create a living implant, so not an implant of steel or plastic, but a living implant that will help to heal defects in your bone of about 2 centimeters, let's say, something that does not heal spontaneously nowadays, and for which there are long and painful treatments necessary. Now, being an engineer, my input in this whole endeavor is not doing the biology, but it's helping the biology move quicker and in a more intelligent way to the final solution. So we want to come up with engineering solutions, with engineering tools, in order for the process to go faster. And in my case specifically, my whole group is working on computer simulations. So we believe that at very different stages in setting up the experiment, interpreting the experiment, translating it to the patient, computer simulations can actually help to reduce animal experiments, to better understand what is going on, and to make the whole process run faster. So that is what we're working on. The way we're working is in very close collaboration with people from various backgrounds. Biologists, medical doctors, biomaterial people, biomechanics people, and very crucial there is that in our framework we have the whole pipeline from basic biology up until clinical implementation. And for me as an engineer, again, that is very exciting because I actually am in a situation where I can say, hopefully within the next couple of years, these patients are the patients that I helped to treat. And that is, I think, very rewarding. Now, some more dry facts. I'm funded by various funding agencies, of which the ERC is the most well-known. I have my indicators, just as everybody. I also edited a couple of books, and I serve as editor for the Scientific Reports Journal. I do reviewing of publications and grants, as we all do. I won a couple of awards, and I'm involved in some servicing in the form of the policy affairs for our, let's say, scientific community within Europe. And I'm also the co-chair of the Young Academy of Belgium, and of course, member of the Site Generation Network. That was the dry facts, but what is the story actually behind these facts? And for that, I think it's important to go back to who I am. I was still born on the same date as I was in the previous summary, but I am the oldest of 4 children, so I have 3 younger siblings. And when I was growing up, I had a variety of hobbies, so I couldn't pick something that I was particularly interested in. I should say probably my #1 was volleyball, if I look at the amount of time that I spent on court. But I also did music, and again, within music I couldn't pick, so I did choir and piano and theory and everything. So I enjoyed very wide varieties of things during my youth. Afterwards, I met my husband, and I had 2 children. They're 4 and 7, and they're great. And they define, for a big part, also my life. And I cannot say that without them, things would be easier. I would have more time for sure, but I don't think I would be where I am right now, or I would be as effective in science as I am right now. So there are challenges related, but there's also big rewards there. A couple of months ago, a journalist from a Dutch newspaper contacted me out of nowhere. He was doing this series on teachers and students, students being already professors, but young professors. And somehow my name came up, and he wanted to know from me how I got started in science, how it all started. So start going back to secondary school up to the point where I was. So I told him how I got involved in all of this, that probably the moment I decided to go into science was in one of these information days that you have before you go to university, where I saw some scientists doing a little workshop on biomedical engineering. And just the way they were sitting there, the interaction that they had with each other, even more so that than the actual subject that they were working on, somehow it appealed to me and it stuck with me. So I guess that is when it started, the idea started to do a PhD afterwards, because I wasn't really going to work on planes or elevators or whatever. I really wanted to do biomedical engineering. Now, when this guy got back to me with the text that he wrote, the 300 words that he distilled from the talk, he put the title onto it, I'm always looking for answers, which sounds extremely sciencey, so I was happy with that, but the contents was so nerdy. I was actually a bit appalled by how nerdy it sounded. But okay, maybe that's me. Maybe if you put it all into words, then I'm a nerd. And I think some of my siblings would confirm that. A couple of years ago, my brother, he was studying marketing management, and he had to do a questionnaire. And my sister and me, we fell in the right age category. And the question was, what do people in their late 20s and early 30s do in their me time? So my sister sent him a very long email, very detailed. Mondays I'm doing this, and then dance class, washing salon, beauty salon, friends, dinner, theater. It was a very long list. And then my email came, and that was it, work and family. Which again, maybe sounds a bit nerdy. But the thing is, what is this work that we're talking about? What is it that we call work? Well, for me, work is basically It's all of this, so it's research, but also talking about research to colleagues in settings like this. It is teaching, it is trying to shape the biomedical engineering program to make sure that our students are actually very well prepared for the world that they have to work in. It is grant writing. It is reviewing. If you don't know how to get into a grant writing, to actually get a grant, well, start by reviewing grants and then you will learn how it is done. It is editing. I wanted to read a book that would introduce me to a certain topic and I couldn't find really what I was looking for, so I edited one myself. It is giving lectures, it's going to conferences, it's going to meetings. Well, and then there's the small print that we don't like to talk about, but that's taking a lot of time. But all of that is work. And then some more. There is additional work or things that you can put as work on your CV. At some point, I wanted to get more involved into the scientific community, which is the virtual physiological human in Europe, which gathers most of the researchers or many of the researchers working on computer simulations of biomedical processes. And I didn't really have a person on the inside. You know, my promoter wasn't really in there, so I wasn't launched into this society. And I still felt that I needed to be part of it. Not in the least because at that point in time there was a funding stream within FP7 that was going solely to this VPH type of research. So I wanted to get in. So I contacted the president. I said, look, I want to get involved in this. Do you have something that I could do? And he said, well, you know, why don't you participate in the policy affairs working group? So I did, and two months later he said, you know, why don't you chair this working group? So I did. I didn't have no experience whatsoever on this policy level, but I learned, and you learn. And we were actually quite successful in the last couple of years. We managed to get this type of computer simulations of biomedical processes endorsed by the parliament as being a big part of e-health. We got an endorsement from the commission, and we actually got now in the new work program, we got some funding. So that was actually, well, I was very proud of that I was able to help and get that in there. Another part of work is being member of the Young Academy. I was one of the founding members of the Young Academy of Belgium, and I believe it's really important for young scientists to also gather and make their voice heard. We often got the question from older scientists, but we already have an academy. So why don't you just become part of this academy? And then they say, well, and then we ask them, like, how many young members do you have? Yeah, well, we have one member that is 39. So what is this one member going to do against 50 members that are 75 and over? I'm exaggerating a little bit. So we actually, so we established this and we got a very good dynamics. It almost feels a little bit like the Girl and Boy Scouts of science. It's that feeling. And I think it's really important, not in the least that you can exchange experiences, but also you can make your position papers, your statement, talk to your stakeholders and actually get things changed. So we had already a first few minor details that were changed based on the input that we gave, and it's very encouraging. You know, it shows that if you group yourself, if you get yourselves together, if you organize yourselves, you can actually change the environment that you're working in. So side generation is actually doing the same thing, but that on a slightly higher level. We're actually, the three of us here, were members of the interdisciplinary, the working group that is focusing on interdisciplinarity. I don't know if that is a coincidence or not. And a few weeks ago, we organized a workshop in Brussels on how to evaluate interdisciplinarity. There's big problems with evaluating interdisciplinary proposals, and there are a lot of recommendations being made and science being done, and so we gathered a number of people together to get input for ourselves, and we will be publishing a position paper on how we feel interdisciplinary research should be evaluated. So we're trying to shape our environment again that we're living in. And well, this is also work. Science communication is becoming more and more important. And last year I followed a workshop on science communication, and it was about bringing humor into your presentations. And I thought, okay, that's fine. Let's give that a try. Until a week before the actual workshop, I got an email saying, can you please give us the subject of your stand-up gig? And I was like, what? Sorry, stand-up? So it actually turned out to be a stand-up comedy thing. So I now am the proud owner of a gig of 5 minutes on science. And my personal gig is about the challenges of being a Belgian scientist, being a Flemish person, or belonging both to a Flemish and a Walloon university. But also that is actually work, although I would say that's more like weekend work then. Now, to wrap up, maybe a few challenges or things that are often, that are maybe recurring themes in what you've seen before. The challenge of mobility. As you've seen, I haven't had positions at big universities in the States, although I've had offers to go abroad and to the States. I have my reasons not to have done so, but I don't think that the fact that you haven't spent so much time abroad necessarily narrows your view. You just have to be very aware of the fact that what you know as your own environment is not necessarily the norm, that there are many other ways out there of doing similar things. So I talk a lot to people. In Belgium, we have a lot of foreign researchers, so we talk a lot about the way things are organized in these other universities. If I have postdocs that go abroad, that is one of the things that I discuss with them, how research is organized back there. I get involved in all kinds of international networks, so in that sense, I feel that I've been able to compensate a little bit for my lack of extended experience out of Belgium. In addition, I did migrate. I now am at a university that is not in my mother tongue. So thank you for Belgium in that sense, where by moving simply 80 kilometers to the southeast, you're in a completely different environment. Research is completely separated between the regions, so I had to learn a new system of working, of funding, of everything. Another challenge is, well, the challenge, if it is a challenge, of gender. Obviously, I'm a woman, and you see the ratio of the female scientists here at the table. I must say that I've never personally experienced any kind of negative influence of me being a woman on where I wanted to go. Maybe it's because I'm by nature rather competitive, and I will just participate in anything that I can participate in, without being too shy or thinking, no, maybe I will not do it this year, I'll do it next year. So I've been informed by older colleagues that apparently that is what women do and men not so much, so I decided I wouldn't do that. I would just go for whatever I'm eligible for and just give it a go. But the numbers are still out there, so I like participating in any kind of event that puts this on the map and tries to bring that under attention. And this is what you see on the right is actually a booklet that belongs to a workshop that is organized by the European Young Academy, by the president of the European Young Academy on gender next week. And funny enough, during the workshop that we organized in Brussels, there was some kind of similarity detected between the problems or the implicit bias in gender and in interdisciplinarity. So that is my final challenge. But it's really not a, for me it wasn't a choice. That was just what I wanted to do. I was interested in both medicine and in engineering, so then what do? That's the only option, going interdisciplinary. And I think of all the things that I've done in my life so far, all the extracurricular activities have helped me really in preparing for this. It wasn't necessarily my education in engineering, but it was my volleyball that helped me the most in preparing for the adventure of interdisciplinarity. How do you deal with all these very competitive profiles and get them together in a single team? How do you convince them of the fact that, well, yes, they need to work on their own career and work on their own spot in the team, but at the same time they need to collaborate, because otherwise you cannot win the game and you cannot ever get anywhere with the entire team. So for me, that was how all the things that I've done in my life actually helped me in my job. And lastly, well, the challenge of interdisciplinarity is that there is still a little bit of vagueness in there. So it's not very clear how and what. And one of the advice that we got 2 weeks ago during the workshop was, well, use that ambiguity, use it to your advantage. Propose what you actually want to do and where you want to go and how the system should change according to you. And I think that is probably the best advice that I can give, or the thing that I try to strive for. If opportunity doesn't knock on your door, well, build one yourself. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for an amazing story. Any immediate questions from the audience here? Yeah, yes, please.
Yeah. Where to find your 5 minutes stand-up show?
Later.
Is that available on YouTube?
It's on YouTube, but it's in Dutch.
Well, that's another opportunity to learn. Okay, thank you very much, Liz. We proceed according to our program. We have one more talk before the coffee break, and change the personalities, and change the slides, change the area. So again, a short pause to make the technology work. So I'm welcoming Associate Professor Søren Frank from University of Southern Denmark, who is not an engineer, I presume. Please, Søren, tell us who you are.
Sorry about this. Yeah, a little bit a change of scene now. I'm from the humanities, but you will hear my story in just a second. Let me just begin my talk by thanking Slava for inviting me and my colleagues. We are very honored to be here. Also, thank you to the European office and to the University of Latvia for having us here. So, before I begin my short 15-minute talk, I just wanted to show you how I have structured it. And Lies, you said that people can do it very different ways, but actually you see that two of your main concepts is also two of my main concepts. And it's not something we talked about in advance, I promise you. Anyway, as you can see from all the alliterations, the many C's, I come from literary studies. We love letters and words. This is what I will center my talk about, the concepts of contingency, chance and choice. And it's going to be a blend of who I am, how I got here, and a little bit of general advice. So, contingency I understand as a kind of an ontology of academia, maybe even life in general. There are simply a lot of things that are basically out of our hands, and this is something I think we have to keep in mind when we sit here too. I mean, we got here, but we got here by a lot of contingencies, coincidences. I understand chance as the opportunities that may arise, and of which timing is essential. Still something that is partly out of our own hands, but if chances arise and the timing is right, you have to seize the moment. Finally, choice. I understand it as an opportunity to create your own profile. Now we have moved from something more or less out of our hands into a position in which we control the events and have the responsibility to make the right choices. Here the contingencies have kind of played out their drama of coincidences, and we have had our well-timed chance and seized the moment. Now we can begin to model our career and create our profile. So speaking of contingencies and my own career, I come from a completely non-academic background, so the question immediately rises, why have I become a professor of literature? Why not a gardener or a carpenter? And if I look back on my career, it's kind of been a long journey, and a lot of contingencies have influenced the pathway I have taken. It could be exterior impulses, for example. I had a high school teacher, a historian, who kind of made me into a humanist in my head before I went to high school. I had this very specific idea of becoming a civil engineer. So a chance meeting, you could say. Then, when I made my decision to go to university, to study at the university, it was to some degree also a matter of randomness that the choice fell on comparative literature, and not astrophysics, mathematics, economy, or history. In a way, it could have been all of those, although maybe some inner inclination bended me towards the discipline of comparative literature. So after completing the university with a master's degree in comparative literature, even then it's a career full of contingencies and competition. First, one has to get a PhD, and I think in my discipline there are probably 1 out of 30 chance to get one. Then getting the postdoc or the assistant professorship, maybe 1 out of 3 gets it. And then getting an associate professorship and become a regular faculty member and a truly independent scholar. Here the chances are perhaps 50-50. In the humanities, it's not unusual to have reached the age of 40 before you actually obtain regular employment as an independent researcher. Or worse, you have become 40 and you actually realize that you just missed your one chance. So just to give you one example from my own career path, when I had my 6th application for a PhD scholarship rejected, I actually took the decision to stop applying and seek job opportunities outside of the university. So I had made my mind up not to pursue a scholarly career. However, I still had one application out in the system, an application that I really didn't believe in, but that was the application that succeeded. And looking back, I was extremely close to have ended up doing something completely different. So if we move on from all the contingencies that we are some kind of part of to the chance dimension, in our profession, I think, a profession so much ruled by contingencies, we sometimes need a little bit of luck. And this luck can be a luck of timing, of being at the right place at the right moment. If it happens, we must be able to take advantage of the situation and seize the opportunity. In my own case, timing played a decisive role in the opportunities that were granted me and not granted someone else, say someone 10 years older than me. Denmark is, like Latvia, a very small country. And we have very little mobility in the humanities. People are not that keen on going abroad because of very good living conditions in Denmark and very good working conditions. So to give you an example, in comparative literature between 1974 and 1994, a period of 20 years, no one got a regular position in Denmark. I was hired myself as an associate professor in 2012, and one year later I chaired a committee that hired 4 associate professors. The point I want to make is that I have benefited from being born at the right moment, and thus been able to apply for a regular position in the period when the 1968 generation retired. Perhaps we will see another period in Denmark, during which very few positions open up in my discipline. So again, you see, we are at this moment still living under career conditions that to a large extent is out of our own hands. But when we get our chance, we must pursue it almost with what I call the one-dimensional focus of a predator, because the world of research is in many ways similar to a jungle, where only the fittest survive. But when you do survive, it's a very inspiring, privileged, and vibrant world to be in. So my third concept of choice. Of course, we make choices along the way. Also, when we are in the midst of contingencies and chances, we make our choices. Just like chances arise and contingencies continue to play a role in our everyday life of research, also after regular employment and independence. During the process, our choices are vital. They are of vital importance because they allow us to create our own unique profile. I have listed a number of areas, 4 to be more specific, that I find very important to take into consideration when young researchers plan their career and try to create their own profile. So, in my opinion, research publications are probably the most important aspect of your profile. They are what endow you with professional legitimacy. It varies, of course, from discipline to discipline. What kind of publications are important? But in my own discipline, the publication of articles in peer-reviewed journals, but also, very importantly, of monographs, most often individually written, are mandatory. Without such publications, you will find it very difficult to progress career-wise. In my own case, I had 2 scholarly monographs, one on migration literature, the green one, and one on Salman Rushdie, the blue one, published. I had 3 edited book anthologies, 2 of them you see there in Danish, one on the theory of place and one on the immigrant in Danish film and literature. So 3 edited book anthologies forthcoming and more than 30 scholarly articles either published or forthcoming when I applied for my associate professorship. And when I chaired the committee that hired 4 associate professors in 2013, all 4 of these that we ended up hiring had in fact extensive lists of publications, including both books and articles, and including publishing houses such as Palgrave Macmillan, Reichenberger, and Harvard University Press. This, of course, is also dependent on the traditions of your discipline. What type of publication is favored? Where do they have to be published? Are they written collectively or individually? And how many publications are required? The experience with the evaluation committee made me at least think that something has changed from the generation that came before my generation and to my generation. It seems to me that today, in this globalized era we live in, there seems to be a higher demand for researchers and for applicants to regular positions to have proven themselves internationally speaking. And there are, of course, like Thomas was mentioning, all sorts of, impact factors and stuff like that. How much publishing houses, how much should it count? It's a quantitative dimension that sometimes hinders us to look at the qualitative dimension. But, the 2 of them often are linked together. Another avenue to take into consideration is a more popular genre of publications. This could allow you to build a more public profile than if you concentrated merely on research publications, strictly speaking. Besides the more public profile, such publications can, in fact, be a lot of fun. We can actually have fun in academia. In my own case, stand-up comedy, right? In my own case, I chose at one point during my early career, around the time when I received a 3-year postdoc grant from the Carlsberg Foundation. And talking about fun, I always urge my students to drink more beer so as to perhaps increase my salary at that time. Never happened. At one point, around 2007, I made this choice to do a parallel project to my traditional research in maritime literature and culture. So my two main areas of research are migration literature and maritime literature and culture. So this was in 2007. when I decided to write a cultural history of Manchester United, the British football club. So the Danish version came out in 2008, and it actually sold pretty well. But more importantly, it also opened the doors to websites, radio, newspapers, and television. In 2011, the book came out in Norwegian, and in 2013 it came out in an English translation with Bloomsbury. That's the London-based publisher that not only publishes Harry Potter, but also a series of intellectual cult books on football. So the two last important issues I want to address is international experience and job functions, based on my own experience. The third very important aspect of career building is, I believe, international experience. As I mentioned earlier, Danish scholars are relatively sedentary and tend to stay in Denmark. However, if not actively seeking jobs abroad, and you should all do that, I did myself but was never offered a position, international experience is still necessary and part of the job. While I was writing my dissertation, and also during my postdoc, I visited Stanford for some months. In 2011, I was invited as a senior fellow for 6 months to a Wissenschaftskolleg in Weimar, Germany. These experiences are immensely inspiring for your own work, and they create lasting networks of very interesting people. But I would add that for young researchers building a career of independence, it is sometimes more important to go somewhere less famous, with professors that actually engage in young people, than to go somewhere famous and be left all alone. I was lucky enough myself to have been some very good places, but at the same time been blessed with some very generous mentors who actually wanted to spend a lot of time on and with me. So last part is the job functions. And my advice concerns the choices you make or the chances you are given in managing other job functions than simply research and teaching. These can be opportunities that give you extra responsibility and influence. In my own case, I directed a research group together with a colleague of mine for 2 years. So, I mean, the physical result of that project was the anthology on place, the gray one there. And it was a very enriching experience working in this research group on place theory. Since 2011, I have also served as chair of the Hans Christian Andersen Literature Award, its academic advisory board. The award is the biggest literary award in Denmark, around 70,000 euros, and is awarded biannually. In 2014, the prize went, for example, to Salman Rushdie. So with this little tour of contingencies, chances, and choices in academic life, I hope to have given you some inspiration for your own careers in the making. And I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Søren. Questions? Yeah, yes, please.
You are coming from humanities.
I'm coming from the humanities, yes.
Previous speakers who came from science, I think that when we are trying to evaluate quality of research, we very often starting from this measurable criteria like German impact factors, citation indices, age indices, and so on. In humanities, I believe it's a little bit more tricky. In small nations like in Denmark, probably the same is true in Latvia, where often we are publishing humanities and from physics, but people from humanities are publishing in their local languages.
Yeah.
And then, in small communities, if we are relying only on expert evaluation, sometimes it's a little bit tricky. So how fair and how precisely, in your opinion, you can judge results, research results in humanities? What are the means how to improve this evaluation procedures? Because if we are applying for different grants, including international grants, we are always willing to have fair evaluation. Feeling is that in humanities it's a little bit tricky. You mentioned already like journals, impact factors and so on, but probably it's not always applicable.
No, I mean, yeah. The bibliometric system was introduced in Denmark, I think 5 years ago or something, and I mean the model was based on natural sciences, and there are a lot of problems in that because I mean a lot of the research in the humanities are I mean I'm from comparative literature where we work almost by definition internationally, but I mean my colleagues in Danish literature are of course dependent on publishing in journals that don't have the same outreach as international journals have. So I mean their research is on very small linguistic groups and cultures. And
local people from
exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I mean, for me, one good thing about the introduction of the bibliometric system in Denmark is that a kind of hierarchy actually happened in terms of which journals are seen as more prestigious than not. But that, of course, also has a backside because, I mean, when the point system have been introduced, people in research tend to seek to be published in the high ranking. It was a very difficult period for the not high ranking journals. In general, I would say that the system in the humanities are not that quantitatively as in the sciences, but it is a problem.
Thank you. Thank you very much. More questions? No? Sorry. Okay. Doesn't seem to be the case. So let's thank the speakers of the first part, and we have a coffee break. So we'll reconvene back slightly before, a few minutes before 4 o'clock. Thank you.